Well, hello there, everybody. We're going to speak to you about a very interesting topic today on our Facebook Live talk, Bloom Talks, and we're speaking about the real reason that opposites attract. So, we're attracted to people who are very different than we are. And in the early stage of our relationship, that's very exciting. That wears off. And after we get out of the infatuation stage, we start wondering, why did I get so attracted to somebody who was more like me? It would be so much easier. But if we can open to the real reason why we're attracted to people that are so different than we are, and this goes for friendships too, not just for a romantic partnership, it really is going to save us some trouble, because there's a very deep, intuitive, natural knowing that's a part of us, that is a part of our drive towards mastery to become whole. And so intuitively, we're drawn to people that have strengths that we're not so developed in those areas. And they are attracted to us for the very same reason, because we have strengths that are very compelling and magnetic to them, because they've got this drive for wholeness going on inside them too. Now, we make up reasons for why we're attracted to the person, that they were good looking, or we have interests in common, or we have backgrounds in common, we have values in common, and that's true, but that is only part of what is going on. So there's this unconscious material that leads us to people. Of all the people that we could choose to get romantically involved with, there's some very important reasons that we get together. Now, like I said, when the infatuation wears off and we get disillusioned, we can start to have doubts. We can start to feel like, oh, this is more trouble than I thought. Maybe it's more trouble than it's worth. This is hard work here. And indeed it is, to get through that stage of disillusionment. And one of the ways to move through the disillusionment, which is kind of a dark, sad, frustrating time, is to open to the teachings that this person has, because we've got a built-in teacher if we're wise enough to take advantage of the opportunity that they're providing. So we want to encourage you in this talk to really look deeply at what the differences are, to tell the truth about what they are, and then open to the possibility that this person might be in your life to learn some of your biggest life lessons. And before I turn it over to Charlie to give you his overview remarks, I just want to give you a few examples. People tend to get together who have different histories, different sore spots, just different areas of sensitivity, or sometimes even different values. So you sometimes hear from the couple, maybe friends, maybe you, maybe people in your family, that say, oh, I'm very thrifty with money, and I'm with a big spender. And it's an irritant for us because I'm disapproving of how much he spends or she spends. Sometimes you get one in the pair who's kind of conflict phobic, and they want to let the sleeping dogs lie, and their attitude is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And the other person wants to lean into the challenge of processing, the things that come up in relationship, and they're not phobic about the differences at all. Then you might have one who is a big togetherness person, and I call them the connectors, and they tend to gravitate to the freedom fighters, whose highest value may be freedom, and they can feel intruded upon or encroached upon. And we did a Facebook Live several weeks ago about the introvert and the extrovert, and they tend to get together and have a lot to teach each other. Just like the big spender and the thrifty one, and the detail-oriented person and the person who has the big global overview. These are all ends of the spectrum that, as long as you don't get polarized, you have a really good opportunity to learn from each other, to strengthen areas that may be your weak suit, to have them become stronger, and that you have a lot to offer your partner as well, because they've got different strengths than you've got, and they have different weak areas than you've got. So it's a good deal and it's a good exchange if you can stay out of polarization and learn from each other. And the more irritating and aggravating those differences are, the bigger opportunity to really learn and grow.
Yes. Yes. So there are no problems. There are only opportunities. It's a great theory, isn't it? Putting it into practice and really living from that as a reality and a truth, that's a little more challenging. And there are lots of learning opportunities in relationships, if you haven't noticed. Another one of the things that we call them are AFGOs, and because we're on the air here, I'm going to clean it up a little bit. But what that stands for is another freaking growth opportunity, another opportunity for me to stretch into my partner's world, for me to let go of my attachment to how I think things should be.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Vivian. Say hello. One of our listeners.
Another opportunity to be wrong and to reassess some of my attachments. So there's lots of opportunities. And you might ask yourself, well, do I really have to take advantage of all these opportunities? I mean, do I have to like them? Do I have to do something with them? And the answer is no, of course not. You don't have to. You can continue to stay plugged into your view of how you think your partner should be. So if you're a spender and they keep trying to repress your spending impulses because they're much more conservative about money, then you can continue to try to influence them to become more like you. It's pretty unlikely that their fundamental character is going to change, but you can keep doing that. You'll create a fair amount of misery for both of you, but you do have that power. We are free. We're free to make ourselves as miserable as we want to by trying to change reality or by trying to control another person. But it's probably a better idea to acknowledge and accept the fact, and it is a fact, that what we call chemistry is really an attraction to someone with whom I feel more whole. And I feel more whole because they're bringing something into my life experience, into my world, that is fulfilling a space that is not complete within me. And it doesn't mean that I have to become more like them. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the way I am or the way they are. But what it means is that this is an opportunity for me to expand my capacity to engage from a place of more wholeness in my world, in my life. And that's really what we feel drawn to it with when Linda talked about this natural knowing that we have that tells us that, yeah, this is somebody with whom I really feel a strong connection. That's really what we're experiencing, is that I'm more authentic, I'm more whole, I'm more complete in the presence of this person. I feel more full. I feel this is right. This is what's meant to be.
Now, you often hear people mention in the women's magazines and blogs about relationships require work. This is some of the work of relationship, is to work with our own mind that tends to be a judgment machine. And sometimes the judgment is, my way is the right way and they're wrong. Sometimes the judgment in the mind can be, they're right and I'm wrong. And if we can stay out of so much judgment about right and wrong and go into just different, interesting how differently we view things. and bring that curiosity to understand, how is it that you see it the way you see it? How is it that you see money's to be spent? It's not to be hoarded. And I want you to understand how I see it, that I have a lot of anxiety if we don't have an emergency account, if the car breaks down and we need to replace it. That if you bring that, what I refer to as option 3, option A is what Charlie was talking about, that creates all the misery, about the home improvement program where you're trying to change them for their own good, to be more like we are. Option B is just shutting up and going along and sucking it up and not really feeling good about it, but keeping it silent, and then it's, infecting us inside. Option C is not trying to change the other person and making them bad and wrong and indulging in our mind or coming out of our mouth with our judgments and criticisms, nor is it sucking it up. This is a more expansive approach to the differences, to have some wonder, to create understanding, which may be different than agreement. But if there's more understanding about why it is that the person is the way they are, there is a little wiggle room there that they might be able to stretch, move a little bit in the direction towards our way of being. We would need to stretch a little bit toward their way of being as well, so that we're more in the center, getting away from the polarization, which makes us so distant and which perpetuates the judgment and criticism and the resentment and the anger and the fighting, or else the sucking it up, which also leads to very unfulfilled personal life and definitely unfulfilled relationship life. So I hope you get this part about option 3. This is a more demanding option. I must say that we don't see a lot of couples taking option C. We see a lot more playing the fighting it out, judging each other, or else sucking it up, rather than using the differences as a growth and development path.
I think part of what we're up against in terms of taking that third option is that it feels more vulnerable to really open up to recognizing the validity of the other person's experience. It feels safer to be antagonistic and defensive and argumentative, because then it feels like we're less susceptible to being dominated or controlled by them. And so, it's natural to feel some form of defensiveness or even get aggressive when it comes to wanting to defend our position and justify it and come up with evidence to prove that we're right and make them wrong. But doing all that, first of all, it never works. I mean, at best, it's a Pyrrhic victory. It's a victory in which we win the battle, but we lose the war. Mm-hmm. And so the battle that we're winning at that moment is, I get to be right here. I defeat my partner who has abdicated their position, and they've accommodated me, probably very grudgingly. They probably still have a fair amount of resentment there because I've been manipulative or coercive, but I get to be right. I get to win. I get to be the one whose will prevails. But Linda talked earlier about the detail-oriented person and then the globally oriented person. She's much more detailed than I am. I miss a lot of details because my vision is more global. It's bigger. It's not better, but I'm just seeing the forest and she's seeing the trees. And that's a good thing that we're both together, because we both need to have each other's perspective, because our own perspective is not inaccurate. It's just limited. Mm-hmm. We can't see both. It's like you can't have the foreground and the background in focus at the same time.
And I just want to say how grateful I am, because I've learned to cultivate what we've come to understand as eagle vision, about seeing the broad overview. because left to my own devices without learning from Charlie about seeing the broad overview, I would have mouse vision and I'd only see the small little details. And that would be such a limited way for me to live my life. So that's one of the things I'm really grateful for. Another thing that I'm really grateful for is Charlie's taught me a lot about solitude because he's introverted. And I had mistaken, before I learned from him, being alone with being lonely. I didn't know that you could be alone and not be lonely, and that it would be really good for me to spend more time alone, peacefully, knowing myself, being with myself, giving to myself. And he's a champ in that area. He's a very self-contained system. And so I'm really grateful that I've learned so much from how comfortable he is in silence, how comfortable he is in solitude, how comfortable he is being all alone. And so I feel like that's grown me. Is my preference still to be detail-oriented? Yes. Am I still the form and structure person? He's much more expansive. Have I still been the strict disciplinarian with the children when they were growing, and he's been more laissez-faire? Yes. But I have learned a lot from him about not being so controlling and with the kids, and I've learned a lot from him, and I will be grateful all my days. But my basic personality is my basic personality. It's just got more flexibility into it than it did.
But there's such a thing as too much of a good thing. So although, for example, I am very comfortable and thrive in solitude, left to my own devices, if I wasn't with somebody who presented a counter influence towards connectedness, I could really easily, and I have at times in my life drifted into a state that wasn't so much solitude, but it was isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Big difference. And Linda's influence has really not only helped me to keep more of a balanced way of being in my world, in my life, where I'm getting my need for connection met as well as my need for solitude, but it's really helped me to appreciate the value of that aspect of my life in a way that I now don't experience relationships so much as an obligation, but I experience it as a real gift, as an opportunity to experience some pleasure in that, and that's one of the ways that we've really both enhanced and supported each other's perspective. There's dozens of other polarizing differences that we've had, but that's probably one of the biggest ones.
In the early years that we were together, I used to call Charlie a kite, that he would be out there in the stratosphere waving around, that he would be so dreamy and so ungrounded with all of his abstract thinking and all of his solitude. He would be out there in the clouds, and that I was the ground, and I held tight to the string on the kite to ground him down to earth. And there were times he really resented me for pulling him down out of the clouds. But over time, he came to understand that my practical, realistic orientation really served him.
Yeah, and one of the things that Linda has lived to see the day of is when I am the one who comes to her saying, hey, you've been really preoccupied. We need to spend some time together.
I love it.
Yeah.
He says we need to
She never
talk.
thought that would ever happen, but it has, miracles can happen.
It's a good thing. So I really feel that there is a tremendous opportunity to go into any of the wounded places. I feel that the gifts are contained inside the wound. So if there are places that are chafing on you, whatever they are, maybe you're raising kids and one of you wants more form and structure and lemons and consequences, and the kids need to know where they stand on the issues and what's going to happen if they don't get their homework done on time or practice their saxophone or whatever it is. And the other person, like Charlie, when we were raising kids, is we don't have to give them consequences. The world will give them consequences. It used to drive me up the wall. But I came to understand that the world does give them consequences, and
Mhm.
some things the kids have to learn on their own.
That's right.
And a more hands-off policy is really useful, and that you can micromanage and helicopter your kids, and it really isn't good for them. And so I still have my ways of doing things, but he's more laissez-faire in so many areas, and I've come to appreciate the hands-off, don't give any unsolicited advice method. Keep your advice to a bare minimum, and even if it's solicited, be careful, because you can make yourself very unpopular by giving people advice. They tend to want to learn things on their own. Now you can give them feedback. And recently we did a Facebook Live on feedback. You can tell them how you feel, what your preferences are, what your needs are, and then we need to learn how to let go. And Charlie's always been a champion about letting go, and I've learned a lot about being able to let go and forgive and let the past be the past and be in the present moment and not worry about the future. And I'm so glad for how present in the moment he is and what a living example he has been. But I like to think that you've learned from me about planning for the future, because I'm strong in vision and planning and have that practical orientation.
The flip side of letting go is commitment.
Yep.
And commitment is something that I wasn't nearly as strong
My strength.
as Linda has been. And so just as she learned to relax her white knuckle grip on things, I really learned how to tighten my grip and extend it and prolong it and develop my commitment muscle through her example. And that's the thing, you know, we don't have to teach the other person what to do. We don't have to tell them. We don't have to make sure that they become the way we want them to. By example, if we can create a relationship in which there's openness and respect for each other, we're going to naturally be inclined to want to develop those aspects of ourselves that we consciously or unconsciously admire in the other person.
I love Gandhi's quote about be the change you want to see in the world. You live it. And if you're living it happily, joyfully, with contentment, with inspiration, with well-being, you're infectious. Do you know that you can infect the people around you with your way of being? They want a piece of the action because they see that you're really thriving in that way of being, and then they want to learn more about it.
Yeah, it's like learning a foreign language almost, because, you know, we do speak different languages in terms of how we see things. And another person's language isn't necessarily inferior to yours. And it's easy to forget that what is absolutely unconditionally, fundamentally, unalterably true, real, factual to us, the opposite could be for the other person, that they could feel just as strongly about their view is the correct view. And so when you realize that, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to go after them to try to coerce them to let it go. And for some of us, and I'm one of them, the more pressure you put on somebody, the more attached they're going to get to their own position, because nobody wants to be told what to feel, how to see things, what to think. Nobody wants that.
It's disrespectful. You know, John Gottman is a researcher who's for decades been studying happy couples versus the unhappy ones. And he talks about the differences, particularly the irreconcilable differences. And he has couples in his love lab where he studies them at the very beginning of their relationship and follows them for decades. They have the same differences. They don't homogenize. Do you know they have the same differences that they came into the relationship with in the very beginning? They learned from each other and they became very tolerant and respectful of the differences. The couples who are doing really well have learned how to make a big space for all it, but they're just not trying to, you know, co-opt the other person into seeing things the way they see them, because that's going to just invite resistance and retaliation and reactivity and unpleasantness. We also did a piece of research, of course not as extensive as Gottman's, but we did this anecdotal research with the couples that we wrote about in our book, Secrets of Great Marriages. And in that book, those couples were the veterans. Do you know they'd really been in relationship for an average of 31 years? So these were not the starry-eyed newlyweds. And they told us a very same thing. We still have the differences we came in with at the beginning, but we've learned from each other, and we've made a very big space to not just tolerate the differences, but appreciate them. And, not that they never fought. Sometimes they did. But overall, on a good day, they could see that this other person was there to enrich their life, and that it would be boring to be with somebody who was just like us.
Getting to this place of appreciation and gratitude for the differences, starting from where we begin, which is feeling threatened by the differences, is not an overnight project.
Right.
This is something that it's a process, and it takes time. And for us, it has been years, literally, that we have been shifting from this position of being attached to being right to being more open and respectful of the other person's perspective. And there are still moments when either one of us can get plugged in to having to be right about something.
Mm-hmm.
But what we found is that those moments are much less frequent than they used to be. And they are just moments.
Mm-hmm.
They're not hours. They're not days. They're not weeks or longer
Mm-hmm.
that we get locked into these impasses. But they're moments, and we move through them very quickly because we quickly remember that, wait a second, this is just not this isn't helpful. And I need to really look at letting go right now. It doesn't mean that this person is right. It just means that they're not wrong.
So this is another area where we were quite different in our early years, that I was conflict phobic and conflict averse, and Charlie was much more comfortable with conflict. And he's taught me a lot about not trying to, smooth over the differences or pretend that they're not there, to lean into the challenge of seeing what the differences are, to tell the truth about them, to see why it is that we see things so differently, to see about our histories that informed us to see things the way we do, and then to have a broader perspective, because he's taught me so much about Eagle Vision. And I'm really grateful for that, because I think that one of the reasons that our relationship is so alive and vital and interesting and fresh and still has, plenty of romance in it, because that spirit of discovery is still there. We're still in a growing, living relationship. And so many people have flattened out in their relationship because they haven't continued to grow as individuals and haven't continued to grow together. So if you have a frame of reference to hold the differences in, don't take our word for it. Find out from your own experience, if you take the lid off of some of these things, to discover, with the spirit of goodwill, get in there and investigate and see how the differences have really enhanced your life so far, and how they may be able to enhance your life going forward even more than perhaps they have done to date.
So we've come to the end of another enlightening half hour, and glad that you could join us today. Next week, tune in, because this is a really big shoe we're going to have next week. And it's about something that is extremely underrated in relationships and is essential to healthy, strong, powerful connections. And that is the power of apology and how to make effective apologies. You don't want to miss this one. So until then,
See you next week.
adios.